One of the questions that I get asked all the time is, how do you come up with the color palettes that you use in your art? And I was thinking about this, and I have a lot of different ways that I collect color ideas. And some of them I have mentioned throughout the Creative Blend art program, so this will be a bit of a recap. But what I wanted to do was combine all those ideas into one video and share with you 7 different ways that you can collect color palette ideas. So let's start with the obvious one. When you get a new set of paints, or it could be a set of pastels or anything like that, any new set of art supplies, I would suggest taking the time to swatch out all the colors so that you know what you are working with. So at this point, you don't necessarily need to worry about mixing colors together. It's a straight up swatch of the colors that you already have. So I have a folder. I've shared this in some of my previous classes, but what I often do is get a piece of paper and swatch out the colors on the type of paper that I like to use. So I do like having a folder, because what that means is that I can try out different types of paper and test out how watercolor handles different kinds of paper. So you could try a hot press paper, which is smooth, and then a cold press paper, which is textured, or perhaps a mixed media paper. So that's the advantage of a folder. So here you can see I have swatched out some of my favorite Daniel Smith colors. This is a swatch sheet of the Sennelier oil pastels. So these are a fairly recent purchase. And what I did was I swatched out all the colors that are in this set. And I also swatched out a few that I already have, so that I have the full collection of all the Sennelier oil pastels that I currently own. And oh, I just noticed something down the bottom here. I've written color combinations to explore. So I've actually taken some of these colors and combined them into little trios based on what I feel look good together. So that's something you could do. It's really easy to do if you're working with pastels, because you don't have any water or any paint or anything like that. So I often do it with colored pencils or pastels. I just swatch out little areas of color and try out different combinations. So I have another set of paints that I recently bought. I have the Winsor & Newton Designers Gouache. I have been holding off on buying gouache for a really long time. I bought this little introductory set. I haven't yet used it, I haven't even opened it. But the first step I will take with these is to swatch them out on a piece of paper, put them into my folder, and just look at the colors in there straight up out of the tube form. So that's step 1. So step 2 is tip 2 is to create some color recipe cards. So the difference between swatching out colors and creating color recipe cards is that we are now getting into mixing colors together. And so I have these ones here that have acrylic paint on them, and I have a whole range of different colors that I like to use in my work. And so what I have next to me is a stash of blank ones. And I actually cut up the paper from this book here. So the paper I'm using for these swatch cards is this fairly affordable Canson mixed media paper, or you could use the Canson XL watercolor paper, would be good for this purpose. And I have cut them down to size. So you can forget which way I did it, that's right. So you can get, I'm just remembering, so you can get 6 out of 1 page. So what I tend to do is write down the colors that I used in the mix on the card, and I usually write the color that I used the most of at the top and then do it in order, in decreasing order. I don't always get that right, but I try and do it that way so that I have an idea of how much of each color I need in order to get the mix. So when I want to paint one of these color recipe cards, I take the piece and I put it down on something that I don't mind getting paint on. So this is like a piece of cardboard, so it might be an old box or something like that you have. And then I put the card down, and that way I can paint this area right up to the edges, because I think that looks really nice. And then I make sure that I put the label on. So these are really handy to have on hand, color recipe cards. You can also do color recipes in a sketchbook or something like that as well. So that's tip number 2, to record your color recipes. The third tip that I want to share is to save your disposable palette paper. So if you do use disposable palette paper, which I do quite a bit, sometimes I look at the palette and I really love the color combination, and I'll glue that palette into a sketchbook and maybe make a few notes so that I can reference back to that color combination at a later point in time. So I have examples here where I have done that, and I've actually done some further mixing on the opposite page to really understand how I got those colors so that I can come back to it later. So that's another way that you can record color, is to keep your disposable color palette sheets. Another idea that I've already mentioned in the Creative Blend art program or demonstrated is creating a collage using magazine snippets. This is actually one of my favorite ways to see how different colors come together. So I find it a very relaxing process, but also very helpful when I'm working to have something like this to kind of rein me in, because sometimes I get a bit carried away with multiple color options going on, and I find that having something like this just keeps me on track with the color idea that I'm working with. Tip number 5 is to paint backgrounds using different color combinations. So loose backgrounds like this in a sketchbook, you can come back and add further colors and details, marks and drawings later. But just starting a painting in this way with a few different colors, getting a background down, is a fun way of doing a color study. So I really like this approach. I've got probably got quite a few examples of pages like this in this book. This is a sea white, I think it's a sea white, sea white sketchbook. It has cartridge paper in it. And so far I've found this book quite good for working with acrylic paint. So what I'm thinking of doing is keeping this book as a color study book and always writing down what I've used in my backgrounds, but then coming back and probably adding in some drawings with Posca paint pens and some mark making, adding some further details onto the pages, but making the main focus of this book color. Tip number 6 is to go out and take some photographs of colors that you enjoy in your natural environment or wherever you are. It could be urban or it could be out in nature. Either of them would work great. Getting up close I find really helpful, so honing in on color palettes. You might also find some really good examples of abstract composition and mark making, so it can be an exercise that helps you out in other aspects of your art, and collecting those into little albums or groups on your phone so that you can refer back. So you might have a whole bunch of photographs that really focus on the color purple or the color green or whatever color you choose. Another approach that's a little bit similar is to create Pinterest boards. So you might go onto Pinterest if you use it and gather up examples of different colors, and it doesn't have to be photographs. It could be paintings, it could be interior design, it could be textiles, patterns, but make a board that is dedicated to a particular color. Or you could do a whole bunch of boards. On my Pinterest page, I have quite a few different boards for different colors, and I find that a really good, useful place to go if I'm feeling a bit stuck and I need some color inspiration. And my final tip is to flick through books or magazines and use sticky notes to highlight any color palettes that you are drawn to, that you are interested in, and you will see that in this module. In this module I'm using art books, but I've also done this in the past using interior design books. It doesn't really matter what you use. The key part of the process is to spend some time noticing what color palettes you like. So this will really help you to hone your color preferences. So there's 7 tips for you to go out and get started collecting color palettes. You don't need to do all of them. I've probably gone a little bit overboard with all the different ways that I collect color, but color is a really important part of the way that I work. I almost always start my paintings with a color idea, so it's something that I do all the time, and I hope there's 1 or 2 ideas in there that you feel will help you with your work too.